Brian Daboll just became the second NFL coach fired this season. Raheem Morris could possibly become the third if the Falcons don't beat the Panthers this Sunday.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, and now part of the number one sports podcast network on the entire planet, perhaps even in the entire galaxy. We, of course, are talking about the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I am your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. And I thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer. You are the reason why we are number one in the galaxy, number one in the universe, because you are everydayers. That means you make this humble podcast your first listen each and every day. All you got to do to become everydayers is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, today's Locked On Falcons is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the FanDuel app. So on today's Locked On Falcons, we will be talking about, will Raheem Morris be following in the footsteps of former New York Giants head coach Brian Daboll in as little as a week? Talk about that possibility if the Falcons are going to make a move in season. We'll talk about the possibility of the Falcons waiting on Raheem Morris and answer the question on if they don't fire Raheem Morris during the season, and he makes it to the end of the season, and gives them something worthwhile, should they bring him back and give him an opportunity to hire a different offensive coordinator? The answer is no, but we'll explain why. And then, talk about the general manager, Terry Fontenot, right? Should he get another shot? And the answer is no to that one, but we'll also explain that on today's episode. So let's jump into the, possibility that Raheem could be the third NFL head coach fired this year. I forgot who the first guy was. It was the Titans, Brian Callahan, right? And now Brian Daboll was fired on Monday. And obviously, if you want to get more insight into the reasoning why and how Brian Daboll got canned, Locked On Giants, part of the number one podcast network on the planet, in the galaxy, in the solar system, right? On this, what's the arm, the Perseus arm, whatever the arm is of the Milky Way galaxy, number one sports podcast network. Locked On Giants is going to have you covered, guys. Am I going to milk that? Yes, I am. I am absolutely going to continue saying out-of-pocket stuff like that. But Locked On Giants will have you covered more on the inside on the Daboll. But, for me, looking at it from afar, they've suffered 4 straight losses, including a couple of fourth-quarter blown leads, including this past Sunday against the Chicago Bears. I remember looking up at the score. I'm like, oh, the Giants got this covered. And then looking back at the scores, midway through the 4 o'clock games, and not realizing that the Bears came back, right? The Giants blew a 10-point lead in the final 6 minutes. Similar, no, not the similar. Nothing was like the blown lead that they had against the Broncos, a month ago. But, with the Giants losing 4 straight, they fired their coach. The Falcons have just lost 4 straight. Could they fire Raheem Morris? And I do think now this has become a possibility. Previously, when we've had these conversations over the first, 8 weeks of the season, 9 weeks of the season, 9 games of the season, I was like, yeah, I don't think we're there yet. I basically said then that unless we get to 6 or more losses in a row, I don't think it's a realistic possibility. But I do kind of think it could be a possibility if the Falcons lose 5 games, because this upcoming Sunday against the Carolina Panthers is kind of a must-win game. And if the Falcons don't win this game, or really more, not necessarily saying if they lose the game, Raheem's going to get canned, but it's if they lose this game in embarrassing fashion, I could definitely see a possibility where Arthur Blank, I don't think it's guaranteed or anything like that, but I could definitely see Arthur Blank saying enough is enough, right? And the reason for that is expectations are going to be high for this game, right? You're going to be at home. You've generally played better at home. In the 3 starts that Michael Penix has made at home this year, the Falcons have averaged 26 points per game, which is, would be the 10th best offense in the NFL from a scoring output. You contrast that with their struggles on the road. They've averaged about 16 points per game in Penix's starts, which would be the 3rd worst scoring offense in the NFL. And, in some ways you can look at the 25 points they scored on the road in Germany against the Colts this past Sunday as a sign of improvement compared to what they had been doing previously. But, we'll talk more about Penix's play on tomorrow's All 22 review. But, this upcoming Sunday against Carolina, you're likely, because of the struggles of the Falcons, you're going to probably have a sparse crowd, right, at home. And Blank will be well aware of all the empty seats that he'll be seeing from his suite in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And if the product on the field isn't up to par, I could see him that sort of being the straw that broke the camel's back. And, it was, after all, looking it up, it was like the one time Arthur Blank has fired a coach in season, right? That was Dan Quinn. It came after a home loss to the Carolina Panthers, which was also that team in 2020's, fifth consecutive loss. Now, granted, that team started 0-5, as opposed to, starting 3-2 and then dropping 5 straight, like potentially this team has. But, that's the one time Arthur Blank has fired a coach in season. Now, you say, what about Bobby Petrino? What about Dan Reeves? Both of those guys essentially quit during the season. Petrino did so to take a job at Arkansas, and Dan Reeves basically was told by Arthur Blank that he was not going to bring him back the following year. And it's like, well, screw that. Then why should I be here for the rest of the season? Which is understandable. But, I wouldn't bet on this being Raheem's last game. But at the same time, I wouldn't be shocked if this Carolina game is his last game, right? And again, like, I'm not saying that, losing this game means that Raheem is cooked. It's more, and again, we'll see if this is the correct opinion or not. Where time will tell on it. But to me, it's more likely if it's a blowout or a lopsided game, a loss in that regard, or the Falcons blow a lead, which you don't want to get Dabolled, right? So basically, any sort of loss that is embarrassing, right, in front of like 25 people that are at the stadium, and that's not a shot at Falcon fans. Like I would be like, why would you? I can only say these on episodes where Game Time is not a sponsor, right? But like I was like, why would you pay to go see the product that the Falcons are delivering as of late? I do not blame Falcon fans for, like, what, I got better things to do for my own mental health and well-being on a Sunday than packing myself in a stadium and paying, high ticket prices and, getting $2 nachos. That's great. But like, that's the only perk you're getting, a $2 hot dog. Okay, I guess that makes it all worth it to go see the Atlanta Falcons. Again, it sounds like I'm taking shots at Falcon fans for not showing up to say, like, that is not what I'm doing. I'm like, you people that are not showing up are the sane people. Those of you that are going to the game are the insane people, which I equally respect. If I'm being honest with you. But, we'll see what happens with Raheem Morris's job status. Got to laugh through the pain, guys. But hopefully the Falcons will have a bounce back game that they were supposed to have 2 weeks ago against Miami. And it's just like, oh, we're just 2 weeks behind. We'll get there. But, the concerns about Raheem's job status means that, like, this is going to be an open question for the remainder of the season. And there's going to be questions about, should, this team does have that bounce. Can't speak. If the team does have that bounce back game this week, and we're not sitting here talking about Raheem being fired, a week from today, and Raheem can sort of circle the wagons and get this team back on track to some semblance of substance by the year's end, is there a possibility that Raheem could be retained with the idea of, like, the real problem with the team is not the head coach, it's the play caller? And should Raheem get a second opportunity to hire a new offensive coordinator? We've seen how it worked out so well with him getting that second opportunity with Jeff Ulbrich this season for the defense. Could we see something similar for the offense? And I'll break down, for me at least, why, like, I don't think Raheem has earned that shot. And I'll explain as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So if you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and simply don't work. That's not SaaS. That's sad. Software as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Rippling is a unified platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance all in one place. They've helped millions of businesses replace a mess of disconnected tools with one system designed to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. You can unite employees, teams, and departments in one system, and Ripley's going to remove the bottlenecks, the busyworks, and the silos that your software created. Whether you want to run your entire HR, IT, and finance operations as one, or just fill in the gaps in your software stack, Rippling can do it all right now. You can get 6 months free when you go to rippling.com/lockedonnfl. That's rippling.com/lockedonnfl for 6 months free. rippling.com/lockedonnfl. Terms and conditions apply. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, right? With the NBA season being back, there's no better place to get in on this action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. I understand, guys, that you may be over the NFL season. Well, might as well get invested in the NBA season, where FanDuel is going to allow you to ride the hot hand. Even if you miss that opening tip-off, they're going to have the live bets that, from everything from who's going to score next to those fourth quarter comebacks that we so love so dearly. And you can combine those live bets into a same game parlay, bet a little, win a lot. So you get a shot at a bigger payout, and it keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late game push. So right now, head on over to FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app to sign up. And if you're a new customer, you get $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Check it out at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So before we continue today's episode, I continually want to thank all of you everydayers of the Locked On Falcons podcast. You are the reason why the Locked On is the #1 sports podcast network. So I appreciate you. So continue to make us your first listen. Hit that like, hit that subscribe on YouTube, and check us out. Give us those 5 stars wherever you are listening on the audio side of things. So, the idea behind, should Raheem Morris get another shot in 2026 with a new offensive coordinator? Now, this was a very pervasive sentiment throughout the month of October. I felt like amongst Falcons fans and media, it seemingly has died down the last couple of weeks, I think. But we did hear at least Orlando Ledbetter of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as recently as last Thursday's Falcons Squad show here on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Sports Atlanta, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. He expressed those sentiments that others were expressing a lot more loudly in October about, Raheem should get an opportunity to hire a new offensive coordinator. Zach Robinson is really the problem here. Raheem hit it out the park with the Ulbrich hire on the second opportunity. So might as well give him an opportunity to do a similar thing with the offensive coordinator. If he can do, arguably half as well as the Ulbrich hire, then, that's potentially a triple or double or whatever you want to call it. For that offensive coordinator hire. And I understand where that sentiment comes from. I just don't agree with it, right? I just don't really understand what Raheem's part of that equation other than choosing this offensive coordinator that you believe is going to be the equivalent of Jeff Ulbrich on the offensive side of the ball. And I'm sure you all have your short lists. Mike McDaniel has been a name that has been thrown around a ton and whatnot. But I don't know what Raheem is bringing to the table. It's like, what is Raheem bringing to the table other than that choice, right? In terms of why the Falcons need to retain Raheem Morris, right? Because the alternative is like, well, just fire Raheem and bring in a offensive-minded head coach that can do both, right? And can do other things, right? Because like when you look at the elements of being the head coach, right? Being this sort of CEO head coach that Raheem is, right? And not necessarily calling plays on offense or defense. Like, what are you really looking at that Raheem is bringing to the table that you're like, we got to keep more of that, right? The clock management, that hasn't been good. The fourth down aggressiveness, okay, that's been fine, right? But like nothing to be like, oh, well, we need that, right? The team hasn't looked prepared or motivated every single week, right? If they were, then you'd be like, okay, well, Raheem is a good coach. It's just didn't pick a good offensive coordinator, right? Like you're not looking at the rest of his assistant coach hires other than Jeff Ulbrich and a couple of others as successful hires really at this point in time, right? And so like I think a lot of it is just people want to keep Raheem because that means we get to keep Ulbrich, because people are like, I really like what Jeff Ulbrich and Nate Ollie, who Jeff Ulbrich brought into the building, have run to this defense, and I want to keep those guys. And so let's keep Raheem in order to make that happen. Although I'm hearing increasing chatter of like people like, let's fire Raheem and make Jeff Ulbrich the head coach, and that's how we keep Jeff Ulbrich. But we'll see how that goes. But I don't know if Jeff Ulbrich wants to see that happen if he has a choice in it. But I'm just like, what are we looking at with this coaching staff, particularly that one that Raheem has assembled, that we're saying like, oh, these assistants are doing great. Right? Like if I took away Jeff Ulbrich, if I took away Nate Ollie, if I took away Zach Robinson, if I took away Dwayne Ledford, I would bet a large percentage of you couldn't name more than 3 assistant head coaches on the team, right? If you couldn't name one of those 4 guys. And like, which of those other guys are you sitting there saying, oh, that guy's doing a great job? Right? Again, probably some of you are yelling at your phone a couple of names or whatnot, but I'm sure most of you would have to sit there and really think about like, yeah, what other assistant coach is doing a great job? So you're not looking at, this assembled staff and being like, oh, Raheem's put together a great coaching staff, right? Like the one coach that you would probably have said, at least last year, was doing a great job as assistant coach is Ike Hilliard. They already fired him this year. So I'm just sitting here going like, what element is Raheem bringing as a head coach that we're saying like, we got to retain that guy other than, well, he hired Jeff Ulbrich. And so I've said this from the jump back when we hired Raheem, going through that first offseason, going through this last offseason, that basically if Zach Robinson fails, like everybody fails. That's really the situation at this point in time. And we'll see if Zach can, figure it out. Of course, we have a lot of faith in Zach Robinson. No, we don't. It's been a while since we had the Eagle screech. So, we'll see what the math, if it changes by year's end, right? If the clock management gets better, if the team is playing harder, right? Looking more prepared on a week-to-week basis. We'll see if there are significant improvement from various units of this roster where we say like, oh, that unit got really good by the end of the season. And that's a sign that, these assistant coaches that no one can name, are actually developing players over these next 8 games. And then we could potentially have a different conversation about Raheem's future beyond this year. But like, until then, it's like kind of a wait and see mode for me. So, I know we're talking about like, firing coaches and whatnot. And I know some of you guys are like, this is 5 weeks too late or whatever. We're talking about this not simply because like, oh, something happened yesterday in the Colts game that caused me to think about this. It was mostly all of these thoughts have been simmering for weeks, if not months, right? We're talking about them now, not because of anything that happened yesterday against the Colts. We're talking about them because we're more than halfway through the season. To me, it feels much more appropriate to have this quote unquote check-in, right? At this point in time with the leadership and the direction of this team, right? This is not meant to be a referendum, although it very much feels like a referendum. So I understand that, but it's kind of just trying to figure out where are we right now with the people that are spearheading this team. And we're not in a good place, right? Obviously. And so I don't say all this stuff to be definitive, right? Like a referendum would potentially be. I think a lot can happen over the next 8 weeks, a lot of good, bad, and all the things in between. But, we'll see how it all plays out for Raheem and his coaching staff. But let's talk about the guy that's in the front office, that's hanging out with Arthur Blank next to him, sitting next to him, or sitting 2 spots over, because we know Rich McKay sitting next to Arthur Blank, but sitting 2 spots over from Arthur Blank in his suite. And last week I called that man Terry Fontenot, who is the Falcons' current GM, a terrorist, right? And to be honest with you, I don't think Terry's a terrible GM. That was just me playing it up. But I also don't think he's the guy that's going to lead the Falcons to the promised land, and I'll explain that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it because it also helps you correct your form in real time and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Today's episode is also brought to you by John Foy. These days, anyone can advertise and claim that they'll handle your injury case, but some of these aren't even real lawyers. They're just out-of-state companies looking to cash in. Others are promising lower fees, but leave you with lower settlements. That's why you got to call John Foy and Associates. At John Foy and Associates, they have a proven track record of getting Georgia clients real results for more than 25 years. They don't just settle, they win. And I love that they treat every client with dignity, compassion, and respect, and they're available 24/7 to take your call. So don't try to fight the insurance companies alone. Call John Foy and Associates today at 404-400-4000. That's 404-400-4000, or visit johnfoy.com to get started. They don't just settle, they win. Get the strong arm. Call attorney John Foy and Associates today. So last week after the trade deadline, I had the audacity to call Terry Fontenot a terrorist and say anybody who supports this man as a general manager is also a terrorist. And that was me, being hyperbolic, exaggerating for laughs, right? My honest opinion on Terry Fontenot as a general manager, he's mid, right? On any given day, week, month, or whenever, he's going to range somewhere between a C+ GM or a C- GM, right? My opinion has always been that he's mediocre. He's far too mediocre to necessitate the amount of love that he gets in some corners, as well as hate that he gets in other corners. Now, certainly calling him a terrorist does qualify as hate. So, I also probably play into that as well. So, I don't think, though, that he is a general manager that I'm eagerly looking forward to signing up for another year of. I don't have the same optimism that other people have, seemingly, that Terry Fontenot is capable of building a sustained winner here in Atlanta. And a lot of that has to do with his methodology, his conviction, that aggressive, trading up type of GM. And I don't see any instance where that sort of conviction that Terry's always pushing, marching to the beat of their own drum, has really benefited the Falcons in a major way. Like none of his big swings that we, in the moment often questioned, none of them have really worked out. It's not to say that they've all been like disasters or anything like that, but like the way I would describe it is he's taking these big swings, swinging for the fences, trying to look for a home run, and the ball bounces off the back wall, and he just winds up turning it into a double. That's really the best case scenario you can say for a lot of those big swings that this team has made, if they haven't outright just whiffed on those things. And so, this notion of like, oh, well, we'll fire Raheem and we'll keep Terry, like, it doesn't make any sense, especially those people that seem to think that Terry should have even greater influence on selecting who should replace Raheem as the head coach. What big swing has Terry made makes you think that he's capable of making the right choice, making a big swing on hiring a head coach like that, right? Which is a massive swing, right? We talk about that every time the coaching cycle comes up. Like no one really knows who's going to be a good head coach, especially when we're talking about assistants. You can only really make that guess after someone has been the head coach, right? It's really just hindsight-based analysis on that one. But, I know there's still people out there that are defending this trade up for James Pierce Jr. It's Watts has been solid, very good. James Pierce has been solid, but every time Terry makes a big, bold choice like this, we go like, well, the process is not very good, but hey, if they get the right results, meaning that if they win games, no one's going to care. Right. But that's my point, where it's like anytime we have those conversations, the Falcons never get the right result. They never win the games. And I don't understand why we're sitting here going like, yes, let's sign up for more of that sort of limbo at best, if you want to call it that sort of purgatory of just like, yeah, they just like making bad decisions and not getting good results. And it's like, let's just keep doing that. It's eventually going to work for us after, 6, 7, 8 years. Okay, sure. We've given it 5 years. But as I said, like Terry's not, to me, geared towards sustainable success, right? Because he went to the Mickey Loomis school of general management academy, right? Mickey Loomis, the Saints GM, has been the most aggressive GM in the NFL, and when it comes to like draft day trades over the last like 15 years, if not longer. And that strategy, to me, that philosophy made sense in New Orleans when he had Drew Brees and Sean Payton. He had a top 5 quarterback. He had a top 5 play caller, arguably. And so pretty much every year, the Saints had a top 5 offense, and that gives you a stable, reliable floor. As we've explained many times on this podcast, offensive success drives team success nowadays in the NFL pretty consistently over, the 15, 20 years that Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton, all those people were doing things. It's why the Saints averaged 10 wins a year under Sean Payton across the 15 years that he was coaching that team. And like, if that's your floor every year, right, where you're pretty consistently, you're going to have a top 5, top 10 offense, you're going to win 9 or 10 games every single year, right? Like, you can be aggressive in the draft and trade up and have that quote unquote conviction. Because if you want to take those big swings, if you hit, like, suddenly you go from a 10-win team to a 13-win team. And that 13-win team is potentially a team that can get the 1 seed and make a deep postseason run and win a Super Bowl. And you saw this kind of happen with the Saints in that historic 2017 draft that included Marshawn Lattimore and Alvin Kamara and Ryan Ramczyk and Marcus Williams, and I'm sure somebody else I'm blanking on, right? Like, that made that strategy, that aggressive approach that Terry Fontenot has basically adapted from Mickey Loomis made sense in New Orleans. It does not make sense in the Atlanta Falcons, in Atlanta, right? Right? They don't have that sort of stability. They don't have that high floor when it comes to having a high-level quarterback, having a high-level play caller / head coach that year in and year out are going to give you a stable foundation, a stable floor, a high floor of, this team is a 9 or 10-win team in terms of their floor. Like the Falcons' floor is like probably a 6 or 7-win team, given their circumstances. And while that aggressive approach can help you turn a 6 or 7-win team maybe into a 9-win team that can finally break through and have that first playoff season in 8 years, right? It's not sustainable for long-term success. That's not a way to turn that team into a consistent winner over the course of 5, 10, or 15 years. Now, maybe one day the Falcons will have that quarterback, will have that head coach, will have that play caller, but we're sitting here miles away from that. And thus, to me, the type of general manager that the Falcons need for in the intervening years is one that's going to be a lot more methodical, one that's going to be much more willing to trade back, accumulate assets, right? Because the goal is to establish that high floor, right? From a player personnel standpoint, if you're not necessarily getting it directly from the quarterback, directly from the play caller / head coach, right? And so that means you have to strengthen the foundation of this team. And that requires draft assets that, Terry Fontenot basically gives away every year in the draft with his trade ups, lucrative draft assets every year, right? And then you couple that with, they're going to start paying some guys, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. That's going to put a limit on your free agent spending. And so draft picks are going to become even more of a premium in the years to come. And you need a general manager that understands that premium. It's not just giving away top 10 picks, 4th round picks, 3rd round picks every single year because he has conviction, right? And you can't keep having a GM that enters every offseason with 5 picks and, looking ahead to the future. And again, I know there's a lot of people out there telling you that this Falcons roster is really good. I don't necessarily agree with that, but like I look ahead and I go like, they got to rebuild potentially this offensive line, this wide receiver core. They got to continue to add to this defense. They need assets. They don't need 5 picks or 6 picks or whatever. They need 10 picks every single year for the next couple of years to really solidify this foundation, build around Michael Penix, assuming that he's going to work out and have a sustainable winner long-term. And to me, Terry just doesn't have that in him. We saw this in this past year's draft. As great as this draft turns out to be in a lot of people's eyes, right? Terry told this story on draft night. He was like, the analytics folks told me to trade back. And I was like, nah, I ain't doing it, right? And he wound up giving up what is currently the 10th overall pick in order to do that, giving up, future assets and whatnot. And so, like, he had every opportunity to prove that he is not necessarily, Mickey Loomis's most thorough and greatest student, the valedictorian of the Mickey Loomis Academy of General Management. But he had that opportunity this past draft cycle. He failed, right? So I sit here and I say, let him go. So now, again, I know people are getting mad at me. Like, we all understood why the Falcons were aggressive and why they traded up, right? We understood that. Like, no one's relitigating pick. I'm not sitting here relitigating pick. I know you're like, yes, you are, Aaron. But I'm sitting here going, like, we all understood at the time, like, why the Falcons were aggressive. Because it was basically like Terry was like, I'm not going to be here. So why do I give a crap if we don't win games this year? Why do I give a crap about 2026 and beyond, right? We understood that. It's the same reason why the Falcons weren't active at the trade deadline, because it's like those draft assets that I would get trading away, being sellers at the trade deadline, I'm not going to get the opportunity to use them if we don't start winning games, right? But like, I don't sit here and go like, why that type of general manager people feel compelled to reward with more power. It doesn't make any sense. So that's kind of where I feel about Terry Fontenot. So I think, as we sit here today, taking a temperature now that more than half of the season has been played, this team is headed for a major reset this offseason. We'll see if that trend continues over the next 8 weeks. And I say that not because, I don't know what's going to happen over the next 8 weeks. I don't have a particularly optimistic outlook on the rest of the Falcon season. I don't have a particularly negative outlook on the rest of the Falcons. I do have a negative outlook, but it's not based off of the Falcons' wins and losses. It's a negative outlook because it's the Falcons. And of course, someone in the Locked On Falcons Discord said this today, and I can't say it any better. He basically said that the most Falcon outcome is for Raheem and company to win just enough games to get Arthur Smith to buy back into him, right? That's similar to that 2019 Dan Quinn team. It's like, you know what? I'm going to give these guys one more shot. So that probably means that they do win, 5 or 6 games. Right, a lot of football left to be played. Right, this time last year, after 9 games, they were 6-3 with 90% playoff odds. They didn't make it. This year, they're 3-6 with less than 5% playoff odds. And not saying they're going to make it. I'm just saying, like, things can change over the back half of the season. So we'll see if the most Falcon outcome happens. This team is never going to be good enough where it's like, oh, it's out of question, or bad enough where it's like, oh, it's clearly definitive that this team needs a lot of work. They're always going to be straddling that fence. And so that is the nature of being a Falcon fan. So continue to make us your first listen here. It's all because of you, right? Those of you that are everydayers. Like, I'm talking to you right there. No, not you. Yeah, him right there. You're the reason why we're the number one podcast network in the galaxy. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So continue to make us your first listen. Check out Locked On NFL for your second listen. Give the madman Tyler Rowland, give Tony Wiggins some love on Locked On NFL. It's all part of the number one podcast network on the planet, your team every